Why is her plate the only one still empty? The question slipped through the glittering ballroom just as the music softened, and for one brief second, Emily Carter thought someone had finally noticed. She sat beneath the silver crest of the royal house, surrounded by hundreds of guests dressed in velvet, silk, and polished jewels, while candlelight shimmered across tables overflowing with roasted chicken, warm bread, glazed carrots, apple tarts, and crystal glasses filled with sparkling cider. Every guest had been welcomed. Every honored family had been served. Everyone except her. Emily lowered her eyes to the untouched place setting before her. The plate was clean. The silverware was perfectly arranged. Even the folded napkin looked more important than she felt. She had been told not to complain. Not tonight. The mating ball was too important, and a quiet Omega was expected to know her place. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hayes laughed with her friends, her golden dress catching the light as several young alphas gathered around her. Emily knew exactly why she had been placed at the far end of the hall. Victoria had made certain of it. Emily had also noticed something else. The servants had passed her table 3 times. Each time, they carried steaming dishes toward everyone else. Each time, they looked away. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her hands folded in her lap. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her embarrassed. Then a small movement caught her attention. A little girl near the servants' entrance was staring at the food with the same quiet hunger Emily felt. The child's mother was working behind the tables, too busy to notice her daughter watching the feast. Emily glanced at her own untouched plate. Then she looked back at the girl. Without thinking, she quietly reached into the small cloth bag beside her chair and pulled out the last piece of bread she had brought from home. She waited until no one was watching, then crossed the short distance and placed it in the child's hands. The girl's eyes widened. "Thank you," she whispered. Emily smiled. "You're welcome." She returned to her seat before anyone could notice. But someone had noticed. High above the ballroom, behind a carved stone balcony, a tall man stood perfectly still. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood had arrived only moments earlier, and no one in the ballroom seemed willing to breathe too loudly in his presence. His silver-gray eyes moved across the crowded hall, past the decorated tables, the proud families, and the eager Omegas hoping to be chosen. Then his gaze stopped. Not on Victoria. Not on the most beautiful woman in the room. It stopped on Emily's empty plate. And then on the little girl holding the bread Emily had given away. Adrian's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Who is she?" he asked. Below, Emily had no idea the most powerful wolf in the kingdom had just spoken her name into the silence. The ballroom seemed brighter after Emily returned to her seat, but somehow the warmth no longer reached her. She kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, pretending she had not noticed the whispers beginning to travel from table to table. The little girl had disappeared back toward the servants' hall, carrying the piece of bread Emily had given her. That small act should have been forgotten in seconds. Instead, Emily felt a strange calm settle over her. At least someone had eaten. Across the room, Victoria Hayes leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something behind a jeweled hand. They both looked toward Emily and laughed softly. Emily lowered her gaze. She had learned long ago that attention was rarely a gift when it came from people like Victoria. Emily had never been the Omega anyone expected to notice. She was 23 years old, quiet by nature, with pale skin, soft brown hair, and gray-blue eyes that seemed to make people uncomfortable because they revealed too much feeling. Her wolf was gentle. Her family had called that a weakness. At every ceremony, every gathering, every important family event, she had been reminded that Omegas like her were meant to support others, not stand beside them. Tonight was supposed to be different. The mating ball was the most important social event of the year. It was where families gathered, alliances were discussed, and eligible wolves hoped to discover the bond that could change their lives. Emily had not expected to be chosen. She had only hoped to leave with her dignity intact. Victoria had other plans. She rose from her table and walked toward Emily with several friends following behind her. "You look comfortable," Victoria said, glancing at the empty plate. Emily offered a polite smile. "I am fine." Victoria tilted her head. "Are you sure? You have not eaten all evening." A few nearby guests turned to listen. Emily felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks. "I was not very hungry." Victoria smiled as though she had just been given proof of something. "Of course you were not." Her friends laughed. Emily said nothing. Then one of the servants approached with a tray of fresh food. Emily thought, for one hopeful second, that someone had finally remembered her. But the servant walked straight past her. Victoria watched him go. "Perhaps the kitchen ran out," she said sweetly. Emily looked at the overflowing tray. Perhaps. She would not argue. She would not beg. She would not let them see how much it hurt. Victoria leaned closer. "Some wolves are simply born to be chosen, Emily. Others should be grateful just to attend." Emily looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in her expression. Only quiet sadness. "I am still grateful," she said. Victoria seemed almost disappointed by the answer. She turned away, leaving Emily alone beneath the royal crest. But above them, Adrian Blackwood had not moved. His attention remained fixed on the girl everyone else had decided was invisible. He had heard every word. And for the first time that evening, the Alpha King wondered how long Emily Carter had been taught to believe that she deserved less. The music changed as the first round of the mating ceremony began. One by one, the eligible Omegas were called toward the center of the ballroom, where the moonstone floor reflected the golden light of hundreds of candles. Emily watched quietly from her table, her empty plate still sitting in front of her. She told herself she was only there to observe. Nothing more. A young Omega named Claire was called first. She stepped forward in a pale blue gown, and an alpha from one of the northern families offered her a silver flower. The room responded with warm applause. Emily smiled with everyone else. Another Omega followed. Then another. Each time, the atmosphere grew more hopeful. Families whispered proudly. Parents exchanged glances. Friends celebrated quietly. Emily remained seated, her hands resting together beneath the table. She wondered what it would feel like to hear her own name called without someone sounding surprised. Across the ballroom, Victoria waited confidently among a group of powerful families. Everyone knew she expected to be chosen. Her family had spent months preparing for this night. Her mother had already introduced her to several influential alphas. Emily could hear pieces of their conversations drifting through the music. Victoria has the perfect bloodline. Her family has influence. She would make an excellent Luna. Emily looked down. She had no impressive family name. No powerful connections. No reputation that could strengthen a kingdom. She had only herself. And tonight, that seemed like very little. Then the music stopped. A hush moved through the ballroom. The royal herald stepped forward and raised one hand. "All guests, please stand." Chairs shifted across the polished floor. Hundreds of wolves rose at once. Emily followed, smoothing the front of her simple cream-colored dress. The great doors at the far end of the ballroom opened slowly. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood entered. The room became completely silent. He wore a dark formal coat marked with the silver crest of the royal house. His presence did not need an announcement. Every person in the ballroom knew who he was. Adrian walked forward with measured steps, his silver-gray eyes moving across the crowd. Emily kept her gaze lowered. She had heard stories about him all her life. The most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. A king known for discipline, restraint, and a kingdom that had remained peaceful under his rule. She had never expected him to notice someone like her. So she did what she had always done when powerful people entered the room. She made herself smaller. Adrian reached the center of the ballroom and stopped. The ceremony. Master bowed. Your Majesty, the eligible Omegas are ready. Adrian gave a slight nod. His eyes moved toward the first group. Then the second. Then the third. He listened as each family was introduced. He asked a few brief questions. Yet he did not choose anyone. The room slowly became uneasy. Victoria straightened, clearly expecting her moment. Emily stood at the edge of the gathering, hoping the night would simply pass. Then Adrian looked beyond the polished gowns and proud families. His gaze found her. Emily felt it before she looked up. For one breath, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear. Adrian was staring directly at her. Not at her family. Not at her dress. At her. And then his eyes shifted downward, toward the untouched plate still waiting at her table. For one long moment, Emily could not move. The Alpha King was looking at her. Not Victoria. Not the other beautifully dressed Omegas waiting beneath the candlelight. Her. Emily lowered her eyes again, certain she had misunderstood. Perhaps he was looking at someone behind her. Perhaps the empty chair beside her had caught his attention. Anything seemed more likely than the truth. Then Adrian spoke. Who is the Omega at the far table? His voice was calm, but it carried through the silent ballroom. The ceremony master glanced toward Emily. Emily Carter, Your Majesty. A murmur passed through the crowd. Victoria's confident expression faded. Emily felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. She wished the floor would open beneath her, but she forced herself to stand straight. Adrian continued to watch her. Why is she sitting alone? No one answered immediately. Lady Margaret Hayes finally stepped forward with a polite smile. Your Majesty, Emily is only a distant family acquaintance. She has no formal position tonight. Adrian's eyes shifted toward her. That was not my question. The room became even quieter. Lady Margaret hesitated. She was invited as a courtesy. Emily felt her heart sink. Courtesy. That was what they had called her presence. Something tolerated. Something unnecessary. Adrian looked back at Emily. Have you eaten? The question was simple. Yet Emily could not seem to find an easy answer. She glanced at the empty plate in front of her. I am fine, Your Majesty. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. That was not what I asked. Emily swallowed. She could feel Victoria watching her from across the room. She could feel the servant standing still. She could feel the weight of hundreds of curious eyes. Finally, Emily whispered, No, Your Majesty. The silence that followed felt enormous. Adrian turned toward the nearest servant. Bring her dinner. The servant immediately bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. He hurried away. Victoria stepped forward before she could stop herself. Your Majesty, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Emily probably chose not to eat. Adrian looked at her. Did she? Victoria paused. I believe so. Adrian's gaze returned to Emily. Did you choose not to eat? Emily shook her head. No, her voice was quiet, but clear. Adrian gave a small nod. Then there was no misunderstanding. The word settled over the ballroom like a sudden winter chill. Emily looked down at her hands. She had spent years learning not to make trouble, not to ask for more, not to take what others believed belonged to them. Yet this man, a king she had never spoken to, had noticed what everyone else had deliberately ignored. A servant returned with a warm plate of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. He placed it carefully before her. Emily stared at the food. She almost did not know what to do. Adrian noticed her hesitation. Eat, he said gently. Emily looked up. For the first time that evening, she met his silver-gray eyes without fear. And somewhere beneath the music, the moonstone floor seemed to glow a little brighter. The ballroom did not return to normal after Adrian told Emily to eat. The music resumed, but the conversation had changed. Every whisper seemed to circle back to the quiet Omega at the far table and the king who had noticed her empty plate. Emily tried to ignore it. She picked up her fork and took a small bite of roasted chicken. The food was warm, simple, and comforting. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She had not realized how hungry she was until then. When she opened them, she found Adrian still watching her from the center of the ballroom. His expression was difficult to read. It was not pity. That mattered to Emily. She had received pity before, and it always made her feel smaller. Adrian looked at her as if he were trying to understand something. Emily lowered her eyes and continued eating. Then a soft voice came from beside her. You should have told someone. Emily looked up. A young servant stood there holding a pitcher of water. Emily recognized her as the woman who had been working near the kitchen earlier. It is all right, Emily said. You do not have to apologize. The servant glanced toward the royal dais. The king saw everything. Emily gave a faint smile. Apparently. Across the ballroom, Victoria was no longer smiling. She stood beside her mother, listening as Lady Margaret spoke quietly into her ear. Victoria looked toward Emily again. This time there was uncertainty in her expression. The ceremony was supposed to be simple. The Alpha King would observe the candidates, families would present their daughters, and by the end of the night, one fortunate Omega would leave with the promise of becoming Luna. Everyone had expected Victoria to be the obvious choice. Her family had influence, wealth, and generations of respected bloodlines. Emily had none of those things. Yet Adrian had interrupted the ceremony for her. The realization unsettled the room. Adrian finally turned toward the ceremony master. Continue. The music began again. Another Omega stepped forward, but Emily noticed that Adrian barely looked at her. His attention returned to the crowd, as though he were searching for something deeper than appearances. The ceremony master announced the next family. A proud father spoke about his daughter's accomplishments. Another praised his family's alliances. Adrian listened patiently. Then he asked one question. What kind of person is she when no one important is watching? The father hesitated. The answer never came. Emily slowly stopped eating. She looked at Adrian. He was not asking about beauty, wealth, or family connections. He was asking about character. Her heart began to beat faster. Then Adrian's gaze moved toward the servant's entrance. The little girl Emily had given bread to was standing there again, holding the empty napkin in both hands. Adrian noticed her. Then he looked back at Emily. Bring the child here, he said. The servant bowed and gently guided the girl forward. Emily immediately stood. Your Majesty, she does not need to be involved. Adrian looked at Emily with quiet certainty. I believe she does. The little girl stopped beside Emily's table. Adrian asked her a simple question. Who gave you the bread? The child pointed directly at Emily. She did. A hush spread through the ballroom. Adrian looked at Emily again. This time, there was something different in his eyes. Not curiosity. Recognition. Interesting, he murmured. And Emily suddenly realized that tonight's ceremony might not be about choosing the most admired Omega at all. The little girl stood beside Emily's table, her small hands wrapped around the empty napkin. The ballroom had gone quiet again. Emily could hear the soft crackle of candle flames and the distant notes of the musicians waiting for permission to continue. Adrian looked at the child, then at Emily. Tell me what happened, he said gently. The girl glanced at Emily before answering. She gave me her bread. Why? Adrian asked. The child shrugged. Because I was hungry. Something shifted in the room. Emily felt dozens of eyes turn toward her, but she no longer felt embarrassed. She felt strangely exposed, as though a simple act she had never considered important had suddenly become the center of the evening. Adrian looked toward the ceremony master. How long has Emily been sitting without a meal? The man swallowed. I do not know, Your Majesty. Adrian's eyes moved toward the serving staff. Who was assigned to this table? No one answered. Emily quickly spoke. Please, Your Majesty. It does not matter anymore. Adrian looked at her. It matters to me. His voice was quiet. That made the words feel even more serious. Emily lowered her eyes. She was not used to anyone saying that her comfort mattered. Adrian stepped away from the center of the ballroom and approached her table. Every conversation stopped. When he reached her, he did not sit down. He simply looked at the meal in front of her. You gave away the only food you had. Emily nodded. She needed it more. Adrian studied her face. And you? Emily hesitated. I can manage. He seemed almost amused by the answer, but there was warmth behind his expression. You keep saying that. Emily looked up. Because it is true. Perhaps, Adrian replied. But managing is not the same as being cared for. The words touched something inside her that she had kept carefully hidden for years. Before she could answer, Lady Margaret stepped forward. Your Majesty, I am certain Emily did not intend to draw attention. She has always been modest. Adrian turned toward her. Modesty is not the issue. Lady Margaret fell silent. Adrian's gaze moved across the ballroom. Tonight, I have listened to families describe wealth, ancestry, influence, and reputation. All useful things, perhaps. But none of them tell me who a person becomes when no one is watching. The ballroom remained silent. Victoria stood perfectly still. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Adrian continued, a crown does not need someone who knows how to impress a room. It needs someone who remembers the people standing outside it. Emily looked at the little girl beside her. The child smiled shyly. Emily smiled back. Then Adrian turned toward the ceremony master. End the family presentations. A wave of surprise moved through the crowd. Your Majesty. I have seen enough. Victoria's face changed. Her mother reached for her hand. Emily stared at Adrian, unable to understand. He had not chosen anyone. Not yet. But his next words made the entire ballroom hold its breath. There is one final person I wish to speak with. His silver-gray eyes settled on Emily. And I believe she has been overlooked long enough. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Emily stared at Adrian, certain she had misunderstood him. She had spent the evening trying to disappear, and now the Alpha King was asking everyone to look at her. Me, she whispered. Adrian gave a calm nod. You. Emily slowly stepped away from her table. The little girl moved back toward the servants' entrance, leaving Emily alone beneath the golden light. With every step toward the center of the ballroom, Emily became more aware of the silence around her. She could hear the soft sound of her own shoes against the polished floor. She could feel Victoria watching her. She could feel hundreds of strangers wondering why the king had chosen to notice an omega no one had considered important. When Emily reached Adrian, she stopped several feet away. Your Majesty. Adrian studied her for a moment. Do you know why I asked you to come here? Emily shook her head. No, good. His answer surprised her. Why is that good? She asked before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched Adrian's face. Because you are not pretending to know something you do not. A few quiet murmurs moved through the room. Emily glanced around nervously. I am not sure what you want from me. Adrian's expression softened. Neither am I. Emily blinked. The answer was so honest that it caught her completely off guard. Adrian continued, that is why I am asking questions. He looked toward the table where Emily had been sitting. When you realized you had not been served, why did you stay quiet? Emily hesitated. I did not want to cause trouble. And when you saw the child? Emily looked toward the servant's entrance. She was hungry. Adrian waited. You were hungry too. Emily lowered her eyes. Yes. Yet you gave her your bread. Emily nodded. Adrian took a slow breath. Why? Emily searched for an answer that would not sound foolish. Finally, she said, because I knew what it felt like to sit there and wonder if anyone remembered you. The words landed softly, but they carried through the silent room. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on her. Emily suddenly realized that she had said more than she intended. She looked down, embarrassed. I am sorry. For what? For speaking so openly. Adrian shook his head. Never apologize for telling the truth. Then he turned toward the gathered families. Tonight, many people have shown me what they want others to see. His gaze moved from one table to another. Emily has shown me something without trying to show me anything at all. Victoria stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, one kind gesture does not make someone worthy of becoming Luna. The room went still. Adrian looked at Victoria, then calmly replied, I agree. Emily's heart sank for one brief second. Then Adrian turned back to her. But neither does a family name. Victoria had no answer. Adrian extended his hand toward Emily, not as a command, but as an invitation. Emily stared at it. She had never imagined that the most powerful man in the kingdom would offer his hand to her. Emily Carter, he said quietly, I would like to know who you are when no one is telling you that you are not enough. Emily slowly placed her hand in his. The moment their hands met, the moonstone beneath their feet began to glow with a soft silver light. A gasp moved through the ballroom. Adrian looked down at the light, then back at Emily. For the first time that night, the king looked genuinely surprised. And Emily realized that whatever had just awakened between them had not been part of the ceremony at all. The silver light beneath their feet continued to glow, spreading across the moonstone floor like reflected moonlight. Emily could barely breathe. Her hand was still in Adrian's, and for the first time since she had entered the ballroom, she forgot about the empty plate, the whispers, and every cruel word spoken that evening. Adrian looked down at their joined hands, his expression unusually thoughtful. I did not expect that, he said quietly. Emily looked up. Neither did I. A soft murmur moved through the ballroom. The ceremony master stepped closer, clearly unsettled. Your Majesty, the moonstone has not responded like this in many years. Adrian raised his eyes. I know. Emily's heart beat faster. What does it mean? Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the ancient silver emblem above the royal dais. For generations, the symbol had represented the bond between the royal line and the moon goddess. It had remained unchanged through countless ceremonies. Tonight, its center had begun to shine with the same pale light beneath Emily's feet. Lady Margaret whispered something to Victoria. Victoria shook her head, unable to hide her disbelief. Emily noticed none of it. She was watching Adrian. Have you ever experienced anything unusual at a mating ceremony? He asked. Emily thought carefully. No, have you ever felt that you were different from other Omegas? Emily almost laughed. Every day. Adrian's expression softened. That is not what I meant. Emily looked down. I have always been told that I am too quiet. Too ordinary. My wolf is gentle. My family says I do not have the presence expected of an important Omega. Adrian listened without interrupting. Then he asked, "And what do you believe?" Emily hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. She had spent so long hearing other people's opinions that she had almost forgotten she was allowed to have one of her own. "I think being gentle is not the same as being weak," she finally said. Adrian's eyes warmed. "That is what I hoped you would say." The room fell silent again. Adrian turned toward the assembled families. "For years, this ceremony has been treated as a contest. The wealthiest families bring their finest candidates. The most influential houses expect recognition. Everyone asks who is the most beautiful, the most accomplished, or the most powerful." He paused. "But a mate is not a prize." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Adrian continued, "A future Luna must be able to see people who are overlooked. She must understand responsibility before privilege. She must remain herself when the room tells her to become someone else." His gaze returned to Emily. Tonight, Emily Carter did exactly that. Victoria's expression fell. Lady Margaret looked away. Emily stood completely still, overwhelmed by words she had never imagined hearing about herself. Then Adrian stepped closer. "I have spent this evening watching everyone." His voice softened. "And I saw you." Emily's eyes filled with quiet emotion. "Why me?" she asked again. Adrian answered without hesitation. "Because when no one was watching, you chose kindness." He lifted her hand gently, and the silver light grew brighter. Across the ballroom, every conversation disappeared. Adrian looked into Emily's eyes. "Emily Carter, I choose you." For a moment, Emily could only stare at Adrian. His words seemed impossible to understand, even though everyone in the ballroom had heard them. The Alpha King had chosen her. Not Victoria. Not one of the polished Omegas from the powerful families. Her. The silver light beneath their feet slowly softened until it became a gentle glow, leaving the ballroom wrapped in warm candlelight. Emily looked toward the empty table where she had spent most of the evening trying not to be noticed. The plate that had once been untouched was still there, but it no longer looked like a symbol of humiliation. Somehow, it felt like the beginning of everything. Adrian released her hand only long enough to face the gathered families. "Let there be no confusion," he said calmly. "My choice is not based on her family name, her wealth, or her position." He looked at Emily. "It is based on who she is." No one spoke. Victoria stood quietly beside her mother, her confidence gone. Emily expected to feel victorious. Instead, she felt something gentler. Relief. For years, she had wondered whether there was something wrong with her because she did not fit the expectations others had created. Tonight, someone had looked past all of those expectations and seen her clearly. Adrian turned back toward her. "You do not have to become someone else because you stand beside me." Emily's eyes lifted to his. "What if I am not ready?" Adrian answered immediately. "Then we take one step at a time." The simplicity of his answer touched her more than any grand promise could have. He did not ask her to become a perfect Luna that night. He did not ask her to forget everything that had happened. He simply offered her a place beside him. Emily glanced once more toward the little girl near the servants' entrance. The child was smiling. Emily smiled back. Then she looked at the ballroom. Hundreds of people who had ignored her earlier were now watching her with a completely different kind of attention. The ceremony master slowly stepped forward and raised the royal emblem. By the ancient tradition of the Moon Court, the king's chosen mate shall be recognized before the assembled packs. Emily's heart raced. Adrian extended his hand again. This time, she accepted it without hesitation. Together, they walked toward the center of the moonstone floor. One by one, the gathered wolves bowed their heads. Emily almost stopped when she saw it. These were the same people who had barely noticed her an hour earlier. Now they were honoring her. Adrian leaned slightly toward her. Are you all right? Emily nodded. I think so. A small smile appeared on his face. Good. Emily looked at him. Thank you for seeing me. Adrian's expression became quiet and sincere. You made yourself visible long before I arrived. The word stayed with her. She understood then that the king had not rescued her from being invisible. He had simply been the first powerful person to notice what had already been there. Her kindness. Her dignity. Her quiet strength. As the moonlight poured through the tall windows, Emily stood beside Adrian beneath the royal crest. The girl who had once sat alone at an empty table was no longer alone. And somewhere in the kingdom beyond those palace walls, a new story was beginning. Not the story of a forgotten Omega who was finally given value, but the story of a woman who had always possessed it.